The rain had a rhythm to it that night in Portland, a gentle but persistent tapping on the windows of the conference hotel. Emily Walker sat at the bar alone, her fingers wrapped around a half-finished glass of Merlot, her badge from the Northwest Design Summit still hanging around her neck. She wasn't the kind to linger after events like this. She usually slipped out early, took her notes, and disappeared back to her quiet life in Seattle. But something about the air tonight, soft, electric, expectant, made her stay a little longer. Across the room, Daniel Hart was scrolling through his phone, trying to ignore the rising sense of exhaustion after 3 days of medical seminars. He wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Pediatrics wasn't even his focus anymore, but his hospital had asked him to attend in place of a colleague. He had planned to leave early. Instead, he found himself sitting just a few stools away from a woman whose quiet presence kept pulling his eyes back. She noticed him, of course. He had that composed but distracted look, like someone carrying 100 thoughts in his head and none of them about the people around him. She liked that. No forced smiles. No pick-up lines. Just a man in his own world. "You look like you're regretting something," she said, surprising even herself. Daniel turned, momentarily caught off guard. Then he smiled. "Only that I didn't leave this place an hour ago." Emily looked. It was a short, genuine sound. "Well, cheers to shared regrets." They clinked glasses, his whiskey to her wine, and the conversation flowed easier than either of them expected. They talked about everything but their real lives. Favorite places they'd never visited. Music that made them cry for no reason. Strangers on airplanes who'd said something that stuck. She didn't tell him about her freelance design work or the 3 ongoing contracts waiting for her back in Seattle. He didn't mention the hospital, or his father's relentless pressure to become chief of pediatrics before he turned 40. It was one of those conversations where time bent and softened. Before they knew it, the bar was closing and the rain had turned into a steady downpour. Daniel offered to walk her to her room, and she hesitated, but just for a second. The elevator ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. When they reached her door, she fumbled with the keycard, acutely aware of how close he was standing. He didn't move to touch her, didn't say anything. Just stood there, as if asking without asking. She opened the door and turned. "You don't seem like the type who does this," she said. "I'm not." "Me neither." And yet, that night, they were the type. It wasn't passionate in a movie scene way. It was slow, hesitant, almost reverent. 2 people clinging for a few hours to the comfort of being understood, even briefly. Nos last names. Nos promises. Just warmth. Juste présence. In the pale morning light, Emily woke to find the other side of the bed empty. No note. No number. Just the soft impression on the pillow where he had been. She sat up slowly, a strange ache settling in her chest, not regret, not quite. Something gently. Something infiniched. When she returned to Seattle later that day, the memory lingered like a dream she couldn't quite remember but couldn't forget either. Weeks passed. Then a month. Her work kept her busy, and she told herself that night had been nothing more than a beautiful anomaly. A single page in a closed book. But then came the nausea. At first, she blamed it on stress. Then food poisoning. But when she stood in the pharmacy aisle staring at a row of pregnancy tests, her hands began to shake. She waited until midnight to take it. There was something about the silence of the hour that felt safe, like the world wouldn't judge her just yet. 2 pink lines. She stared at them for a long time, her mind a blur of shock and disbelief. She counted the weeks, went over the dates. There had been no one else. Not before. Not after. She sat on the cold tile floor of her bathroom, knees pulled to her chest, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on her ribs. She wasn't ready. She hadn't planned for this. She was alone. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to feel fear, not fully. Beneath the panic was a strange, swelling sense of wonder. Life. Inside her. Unasked for, but undeniably there. She thought of the man with the tired eyes and quiet voice. The way he had listened, really listened, without needing to fix or explain. She didn't even know his last name. Only Daniel. Only a memory. For days, she told no one. Not her sister. Not her closest friend. It felt too fragile to speak aloud. But slowly, she began to build a life around the idea that she would become a mother.
She mais oui docteur.
Adjusted her freelance schedule. Budgeted down to the last cent. And when people asked about the father, she only smiled and said, "It's just me." 9 months later, Lily Walker came into the world on a rainy spring morning, her cry sharp and immediate. Emily held her close, eyes full of tears. She hadn't let herself cry until then. Looking down at her daughter's tiny face, she whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing, baby girl. But I promise I'm all in." In that moment, she didn't think about Daniel, or the what-ifs. She thought only of the weight in her arms, the heart beating next to hers. The past had given her a single night. The future, she decided, would belong to the two of them. Emily Walker had always prided herself on being composed. Through the ups and downs of freelance life, late payments from clients, and creative blocks that stretched for weeks, she never allowed herself to unravel. She wasn't built that way. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But nothing had prepared her for this.
Two pink lines.
Still.
Bright. Indéniable.
The pregnancy test lay on the bathroom counter like a verdict. Emily stared at it as if willing the result to change, to blur, to disappear. But it didn't. It just sat there, unflinching, while her world quietly tilted. She hadn't seen this coming. Not at all. There had been that one night, Portland, the conference, the man with the quiet voice and kind eyes. Daniel. She didn't even know his last name. She'd never expected to see him again. And now, he was a part of her in a way that felt both miraculous and terrifying. Her phone buzzed on the sink. A reminder for a client call in 20 minutes. She was supposed to finalize a branding deck, deliver edits, sound confident and in control. Emily looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and disoriented. She splashed cold water on her cheeks, took a breath, and stepped back into her tiny one-bedroom apartment like she wasn't carrying a secret that had changed everything. The days that followed blurred together. In between work and errands, she visited a clinic to confirm the pregnancy. She sat in the waiting room, surrounded by strangers, wondering if any of them felt as alone as she did. When the nurse handed her the official paperwork and pamphlets, Emily felt a strange sense of detachment, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. "Do you have a support system?" the nurse asked gently. Emily nodded automatically. It was a lie. Or maybe just a hope. At night, she would lie in bed with a hand on her stomach, barely a bump yet, and talk in whispers to the life inside her. She didn't know what to say, only that she had to say something. "I don't know how to do this," she'd murmur. "But I'll figure it out. I promise." The decision to keep the baby was never really a decision. Not for her. There was fear, yes, so much fear, but beneath it was a quiet certainty. She wasn't walking away from this. She couldn't. Her sister Rachel was the first person she told. They were sitting in a coffee shop, and Emily just blurted it out between sips of chai.
Imprégnant. Rachel blinked.
"What?" "I'm having a baby." Rachel leaned forward, her expression a mix of shock and concern. "Whose?" Emily hesitated.
Someone y Main Portland.
"It was, one night. I don't know his last name. He doesn't know." The silence between them grew heavy. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Okay.
So what now?"
"I don't know," Emily said. "But I'm not asking him for anything.
This is mean.
I'm going to do this alone." And so she did. The months passed slowly, marked by prenatal appointments and midnight cravings, design deadlines and nursery sketches on napkins. She moved her desk closer to the window for better light and started taking fewer projects, opting for quality over quantity. She researched everything: cribs, breastfeeding, baby carriers, birthing methods, until her browser history looked like a new parent's manifesto. There were days she cried in the shower, afraid of what lay ahead. Would she be enough? Could she give her child the life she deserved? But there were other days, bright, clear mornings when she felt the baby move for the first time, when she painted the nursery a soft gray blue, when she held a onesie in her hands and smiled without even meaning to. She named the baby Lily before she was even born. It came to her in a dream, simple, strong, gentle. A name that felt like a beginning. By the time she reached her third trimester, Emily had built a new rhythm for her life. Her apartment was modest, but warm. Her fridge was always stocked. Her laptop never strayed far, but she was learning to rest. To breathe. She went into labor on a rainy Tuesday morning, alone but not afraid. She called Rachel, who arrived in a flurry of panic and car keys. The delivery was long and exhausting. The pain came in waves that knocked the air from her lungs, but she didn't scream. She clenched her teeth, held her sister's hand, and focused on the one thing that mattered, meeting her daughter. When Lily was placed on her chest, tiny and wrinkled and loud, Emily wept harder than she ever had. Not from pain. Not from fear. From love.
Gros. Immense.
Immediate. In that hospital room, all the what-ifs vanished. She didn't care that Lily's father didn't know. She didn't care that she didn't have a partner or a perfect plan. She had Lily. And Lily had her. The first few weeks were a haze of sleepless nights and swaddled mornings. Emily discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed. She learned how to function on 3 hours of sleep, how to calm a screaming newborn, how to laugh through exhaustion. There were hard moments, of course, moments when the weight of single motherhood pressed against her chest so tightly she could barely breathe. But every time Lily smiled, or wrapped her tiny fingers around Emily's, it reminded her why she chose this. She never looked for Daniel. Never tried to find him. She told herself it was better this way. Clean. Simple. But late at night, when Lily slept soundly beside her, she sometimes wondered. Was he out there thinking of her? Would he have wanted to know? She buried the questions. She had no time for them. Her world had narrowed to the little girl who now called her mom. And that, Emily believed, was enough. Until one rainy afternoon, nearly 6 years later, when Lily spiked a fever and everything changed. But that part of the story hadn't happened yet. For now, Emily was simply a mother. Strong. Alone. And completely in love. The first time Emily Walker held Lily in her arms, she felt two things at once, overwhelming love and paralyzing fear. She had prepared for this moment, read the books, taken the classes, organized the nursery to military precision. But none of that could have prepared her for the realness of it, the weight of Lily's tiny body pressed against her chest, the responsibility that surged through her with each heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, time lost its rhythm.
Days bled into night and back again.
Feedings, diaper changes, burping, swaddling, it all became a blur of motion and instinct. Emily was exhausted, her body sore and her emotions fragile. But she kept going, powered by something deeper than strength, devotion. Lily had colic for the first 3 months. She cried for hours, inconsolable. Emily tried everything, rocking her in the dark, walking circles around the apartment, singing lullabies through gritted teeth and sleepless tears. There were moments when she collapsed on the floor beside the crib and cried along with her baby, her voice hoarse, her nerves frayed. But then came the morning Lily smiled, really smiled, for the first time. Emily had just pulled back the curtains in the bedroom, the soft light of dawn spilling in. She turned to find Lily watching her, her eyes wide and curious. And then slowly, her lips curled upward into a gummy radiant grin.
Emily looked through her tears.
"Well, hello there," she whispered. "I've been waiting for that." That moment was the pivot. Things didn't suddenly get easy, motherhood never did, but Emily began to trust herself more. Her movements became more fluid, her intuition stronger. She stopped second-guessing every cry. She learned to read Lily's cues, the subtle language of newborn needs. It was like learning to dance with a partner who couldn't speak but understood everything. When Lily turned 6 months, Emily threw a small celebration. Just her, Lily, and a camera propped up on a stack of books. She made a tiny cupcake, which Lily promptly smashed into her high chair. Emily laughed until her stomach hurt. She posted the photo online with a simple caption, "Half a year of Lily."
Alpha refus.
Her clients slowly adjusted to her new rhythm. She turned down big contracts that required too much travel or inflexible hours. Instead, she focused on small branding projects and illustration work. Her days started early and ended late, but somehow, she made it work. Not perfectly, but with purpose. There were times when loneliness crept in like fog. At night, after Lily had gone to sleep and the apartment was silent, Emily would sit by the window with a cup of tea and stare out into the darkness. She would imagine what life might have looked like if Daniel had stayed. If they had exchanged numbers. If she had told him. But those thoughts always ended the same way. She would look into Lily's nursery, watch her chest rise and fall in the crib, and whisper, it's just us, baby girl. And that's enough. Emily kept a journal during Lily's first year, something she hoped to give her one day. She filled its pages with milestones, first tooth, first laugh, first steps, and with reflections on what it meant to raise a child alone. Some days, I feel like a superhero, she wrote.
Other days, like a ghost.
But through it all, I'm here. I'm yours. When Lily turned 1, Emily invited Rachel and a few close friends over for a backyard party. It was modest, paper decorations, a homemade cake, second-hand party hats, but to Emily, it felt like a triumph. She had made it through the first year. She had kept her daughter fed, safe, loved. She had grown, reshaped, and redefined herself entirely. The years that followed moved quickly. Lily blossomed into a bright, curious child. She loved books, puzzles, and anything involving animals. She would press her nose to the window whenever it rained, watching the droplets race down the glass with wide-eyed fascination. She has your intensity, Rachel said one day, watching Lily build a block tower with laser focus. And your stubborn streak. Emily smiled. She gets that honestly. By the time Lily was 5, Emily had built a life that, while far from traditional, was full. She worked part-time as a remote design consultant for a non-profit and supplemented with freelance illustration commissions. Their apartment was small but cozy, filled with color and light. Bookshelves sagged with storybooks, and Lily's drawings were taped across the walls like art in a gallery. Every Sunday, they visited the farmer's market. Emily would let Lily pick one new fruit or vegetable to try, and they'd turn it into a game. Can we eat it? Can we name it? They planted a tomato plant in a window box that spring, and Lily insisted on naming each sprout. Still, there were questions. Mommy, do I have a dad? Emily had anticipated it, but it still caught her off guard. They were lying on the rug, Lily's head in her lap as Emily brushed her hair.
You do? She said softly.
But I haven't seen him in a long time. Is he nice? Emily paused. He was very kind when I met him. Did he love me? Emily's throat tightened. She looked down at Lily's innocent face, so full of trust. I think if he met you, she whispered, he would love you very much. Lily accepted that answer with the uncomplicated grace of a child and turned back to her picture book. But the question stayed with Emily. She didn't regret her decision to raise Lily alone. But there were moments, more now than before, when she wondered what would happen if Daniel ever reappeared. Did he even remember her? Did he ever think about that night? She had no answers. And she didn't have time to dwell on them. Until one rainy afternoon, 6-year-old Lily came home from school with flushed cheeks and glassy eyes. By dinner, her temperature was spiking. By midnight, she was struggling to breathe. Emily held her tightly, panic creeping in as Lily whimpered in her arms. She had always managed on her own. She had always found a way. But in that moment, for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. She needed help. And without knowing why, her thoughts turned to Daniel, the man who didn't know he had a daughter. Yet, the emergency room at Seattle General buzzed with fluorescent light and quiet urgency. Nurses wheeled gurneys past one another with practiced ease, monitors beeped in steady rhythm, and behind every curtain, lives were changing, some gradually, some in an instant. Emily Walker sat hunched in the corner of room 14, Lily's small body curled on the hospital bed beside her. The 6-year-old was pale and drenched in sweat, her breaths shallow and fast, her lips tinged slightly blue. Emily hadn't slept in nearly 36 hours. She could still hear her own voice, cracked and frantic, pleading with the 911 operator only hours earlier. A nurse entered quietly, checking Lily's vitals, noting the numbers on her chart. Her oxygen levels are still low. We're prepping for additional tests. The pediatric attending will be in shortly. Emily nodded, trying to hide her panic behind a tight-lipped smile. Is she going to be okay? We're doing everything we can. When the nurse left, Emily leaned over Lily and gently brushed back a strand of damp hair from her daughter's forehead. I'm here, baby, she whispered.
I'm not going anywhere.
She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until the door creaked open again. She turned, expecting another nurse or maybe a resident. Instead, it was him.
Daniel Hart.
He stood in the doorway in navy blue scrubs, a stethoscope slung around his neck, a chart in hand. He looked almost exactly as she remembered him, though older. His jaw was slightly more defined, his eyes darker, more tired, but there was no mistaking the man from Portland.
Not in a million years.
He didn't see her at first. He was reading the chart, muttering to himself.
Lily Walker.
Age 6.
Sévère respiratory distress.
Fever, oxygen saturation. Then his eyes lifted. Their gazes met. Time stopped. Emily, he said, stunned. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel. He took a hesitant step into the room, blinking, trying to process what he was seeing. I didn't expect, he trailed off, his eyes shifting to the bed.
She's your doctor.
Emily nodded slowly. Her name is Lily. Daniel turned his attention to the child lying between them, and something changed in his face. A flicker of recognition. Of shock.
Of something deeper.
He stepped closer, lifting the chart again, now with trembling fingers.
She's my patient.
I didn't know you worked here, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't usually cover the ER, he replied. I'm filling in for a colleague tonight. He swallowed, looking from the chart to Lily, then back to Emily. 6 years old, he said quietly. Her last name is Walker. She's mine, Emily said firmly, protectively. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still fixed on Lily, his mind clearly working, tracing timelines, possibilities. Emily stood, her arms folded. You need to focus on her, not on me. He blinked, as if waking up. Of course. His voice shifted, became clinical. We'll order a chest X-ray, blood work, and a viral panel. Her oxygen level is too low to send her home. I'll admit her for overnight observation, at least. He turned to leave, then stopped. You'll be with her? Emily nodded. Always. An hour passed. Tests were done. 4 fluids were administered. Lily drifted in and out of sleep, her small body limp beneath the hospital blankets. Daniel returned after reviewing the preliminary results. It looks like a respiratory virus, but there are some irregularities in her immune markers. Her white blood cell count is off. I'd like to do a more detailed workup, genetic screening maybe.
Émilie t'enseigne.
Genetic.
Et hésitait-elle.
It's just precautionary. There's a chance she's having an atypical immune response. It could help us find the right treatment path. She looked down at Lily, who was sleeping fitfully, then back at Daniel. His expression softened. Emily, is there anything I need to know? About her medical history? Family history?
Her lips parted, then closed again.
Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack open her ribs. She had avoided this moment for 6 years. And now it stood in front of her, wearing scrubs and concern and a stethoscope. She doesn't know, Emily said quietly. About you. Daniel looked stunned. You never told her? I never told anyone. His voice dropped. Is she mine? The question hung between them, heavier than anything she had ever held. She looked at Lily, then back at Daniel. Yes.
Silence fell again.
The monitors beeped. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Daniel let out a breath he'd clearly been holding for years. I had a feeling, he said finally. The moment I saw her, something. Emily didn't answer. She didn't know how. He walked to the bedside and gently adjusted Lily's blanket. I'll do whatever I can to help her. You don't have to explain anything right now. But she's my daughter, Emily.
You have a right to know.
And she has a right to know me. She sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. This wasn't how I wanted it to happen. Daniel nodded slowly. Life doesn't wait for perfect timing. They sat in silence for a long time. He stood beside the bed, she beside the chair. Both watching the same child, both feeling the earth shift beneath them. Finally, Daniel said, I'll be back in a few hours. I want to monitor her overnight. Emily didn't look at him. Thank you, doctor. He hesitated at the door, then turned back. I don't know what you've been through these past 6 years. But you raised a beautiful little girl. You didn't do this alone, Emily.
You built something good.
I can see it. When he left, Emily stared at the door for a long time. Her hands were shaking. Everything was changing. And she had no idea what came next. Daniel Hart didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in the on-call room, the door shut tight, the overhead light off, just the dim glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face. He had pulled up Lily Walker's preliminary test results again, reading them for the third time. White blood cell irregularities, a possible immunodeficiency marker, nothing conclusive but enough to merit caution. It wasn't just her chart that kept him awake. It was her eyes.
Lily's eyes.
His eyes. He had seen them in the mirror his whole life and again in the pictures of his mother's family. They weren't just familiar, they were identical. The same shade, the same shape, the same way they shifted when she was confused or tired. He hadn't wanted to believe it at first. Not because he was denying the possibility, but because admitting it would undo everything he had built around the idea of who he was. Until tonight, he had been a doctor with a clear path. He came from a long line of physicians, grew up with expectations carved into stone. By 36, he was supposed to be married, settled, on the verge of becoming head of pediatrics. Instead, he had a daughter, 6 years old, who didn't even know he existed. He had 1,000 questions. Why didn't Emily tell him? Did she plan to hide it forever? Would she still have said anything if fate hadn't thrown them into the same room? But those questions didn't matter now. What mattered was Lily. At 3:30 a.m., he walked back into her room. Emily was half asleep in the chair beside the bed, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her arms folded protectively. She stirred when she heard his footsteps.
She's stable, Daniel said softly.
Still running a fever, but her oxygen levels have improved a little. The 4 fluids are helping. Emily nodded, brushing hair from her face. Thank you. He hesitated, then walked over to the other side of the bed. Lily shifted in her sleep, her small face relaxed, cheeks flushed. She's stronger than she looks, he said. She gets that from me, Emily replied, and for the first time, a tiny smile played at her lips. Daniel sat down in the chair across from her. The silence between them this time was less sharp. Tense, still but not cutting. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need the truth. Emily's eyes didn't flinch. Okay. Why didn't you tell me?
She exhaled slowly, the weight of the question sinking in. She had imagined 10 conversations à tous en times. Imagined the Angers, the confusion, the heartbreak.
But in her mind, she'd always had time to prepare. Now, there was only this moment. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said honestly.
You left before he woke up.
We didn't exchange numbers. It was just one night.
And when he found out?
I froze. He didn't interrupt. I thought about tracking you down, she continued. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't even know your last name. And then time passed. I told myself it was better this way. Cleaner. Safer. For who? He asked, voice quiet but steady. For her, she said without hesitation. I didn't want her to grow up waiting on a man she'd never met. Wondering why he wasn't there. If you'd shown up and then left, she shook her head. I couldn't risk that. Daniel looked away for a moment, then back at her. You didn't even give me a chance. No, she admitted. I didn't. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to process.
6 years, Emily. He missed everything.
I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I was doing the best I could. Daniel's shoulders dropped, the fire in him dimming into something more tired than angry. You did more than your best. I see that now. But she's mine too. And I want to be part of her life. Not just as her doctor. As her father. Emily's heart skipped. You think it's that simple? No, he said. I know it's not. But I don't care how complicated it gets.
I'm not walking away.
She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since Portland. The man across from her wasn't the same person. He was older, steadier. There was a weight in his eyes, but also clarity. He wasn't speaking from guilt. He meant it. There's something you should know, she said. He tilted his head. They're running genetic panels to determine how best to treat Lily. If there's something hereditary going on, your medical history could be the key to helping her. His jaw clenched slightly, then relaxed. Whatever they need. I'll provide it. Blood samples, full history, anything. I appreciate that. He paused, then stood slowly.
Can come back in the morning? When she's awake.
Emily looked at Lily, then nodded.
If that is what you want.
It is. He moved to the door, then turned back. Thank you.
For raising her. For loving her.
Emily didn't reply, but she watched him go, her throat tight with everything she couldn't say. After he left, she leaned over Lily again, kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're about to meet your dad, baby. And no matter how messy this gets, we'll figure it out. I promise." Outside, rain tapped gently against the window pane, just like it had 6 years ago. Only this time, the morning would come with answers.
The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of soft footsteps and the rustle of a curtain being drawn back.
Morning light streamed into the hospital room, casting warm gold across Lily's pale cheeks. Her fever had broken sometime in the night, and though she still looked tired and weak, her breathing had eased. The monitors beside her beeped in a calm, steady rhythm. Emily sat up stiffly in the hospital chair, rubbing the back of her neck. Her gaze immediately shifted to Lily, who stirred and blinked slowly at the light.
Hey, sweetheart, Emily whispered, brushing Lily's hair back. You're okay.
You're in the hospital, but you're going to be just fine. Lily looked around, confused. Why am I here? You had a bad fever, Emily said gently. But the doctors are taking care of you. Before Lily could respond, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stepped in, still in scrubs but with a different air about him now. There was no shock in his expression, no uncertainty.
Juste qui résolve.
Lily looked at him curiously.
Are you my doctor?
Daniel smiled. I am. I'm Dr. Hart.
Emily t'en said, watching the interaction.
She wasn't sure if this was the moment. If it was too soon. But Daniel didn't push. He simply approached the bed, pulled up Lily's chart, and began explaining the test results in a calm, reassuring tone that even a 6-year-old could follow. You were very brave last night, he said. Your body had a hard time fighting off a virus, but you're already doing better. We're just going to keep an eye on you for a little while longer, okay? Lily nodded slowly. Will I get to go home soon? As soon as you're feeling better, he said. Maybe even tomorrow. After a few more questions and a check of her vitals, Daniel stood and gave Emily a small nod before exiting the room.
Emily exhaled slowly, her heart still racing.
She leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. I'm going to talk to the doctor for a minute, okay? Okay, Lily murmured, her eyes already drifting shut again. Emily stepped out into the hallway where Daniel was waiting, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He straightened when she approached. She's going to be okay, he said softly. No signs of anything chronic in the initial panel. Her immune system just had a rough time with this one. Thank God, Emily whispered. There was a pause. Then Daniel asked, Can we talk?
Somewhere private.
Emily hesitated but nodded. They found an empty family consultation room down the hall. She closed the door behind them. I've been thinking about this all night, Daniel said.
And all morning.
Emily waited. I want to be in her life, Emily. Not just show up in emergencies or peek through the glass.
You want to be there.
Really be there. She folded her arms. You don't even know her. I want to. It's not that simple. You can't just walk in after 6 years and expect to. I'm not expecting anything, he interrupted. I'm asking.
Let me show up.
Let me try. Her jaw tightened. And what if you can't follow through? What if this is temporary? What if she gets attached and then you leave? I won't, he said. I know you don't have a reason to believe me. But I'm not that guy anymore. I never should have left that night without giving you a way to reach me. That was a mistake. But I want to fix what I can now. Emily looked down, her thoughts spinning. The truth was, she wanted to believe him. She wanted Lily to have a father who cared, who showed up, who stayed. But fear had been her compass for 6 years, and it didn't loosen its grip easily. Okay, she said finally, quietly. But we go slow. She doesn't know the truth yet.
You're a doctor, Chimay. That is all, For now. Un-t-il y figura out tout à l'heure.
On my terms. Daniel nodded.
Whatever you decide. I'll follow your lead.
I mean it, she said. If you give me even a hint that you're going to disappear or change your mind, I'm shutting the door. I won't, he said again. I'm here. For good. They stood in silence for a moment before she turned to leave the room. Daniel followed her back toward Lily's room but stopped just before they entered. Emily, he said, and she turned. I've thought about that night a lot over the years. Not because I expected anything to come of it, but because of how it felt. It wasn't just a moment. Not to me. She looked at him for a long time. It was more than a moment. But it wasn't a promise. This, Lily, is a promise. One we both have to keep. I will, he said. I want to. Inside the hospital room, Lily was wide awake now, flipping through a picture book on the tray table. She looked up as they entered. Did the doctor say I can go home soon? She asked. Emily smiled. He did. Maybe tomorrow. Daniel pulled up a chair and sat beside her. In the meantime, can I read with you? I brought a few stories from the pediatric ward. Lily tilted her head. Okay. But I like the ones with animals. Perfect, Daniel said, pulling out a well-worn book. How do you feel about a turtle who wants to learn ballet? Lily giggled.
Turtles can't dance.
You'd be surprised, Daniel said. This one has dreams. Emily watched from the corner, her arms crossed but her face softer than before. It was surreal, watching them interact, watching Daniel slowly step into a role neither of them had prepared for. But maybe that was how all real things began, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady choices. By the time visiting hours ended, Lily was dozing off again, her fingers still curled around the edge of the turtle book. Daniel stood and turned to Emily.
I'll be back tomorrow.
With more books. Emily nodded. Okay. He paused at the door. Thank you. For letting me in. She didn't answer. But as the door closed behind him, she whispered, Don't make me regret it. And for the first time in 6 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Lily wouldn't have to grow up without a father after all. 2 weeks had passed since Lily was discharged from the hospital. Her recovery had been swift, and aside from a lingering cough, she was back to her usual curious, chatty self. Emily had returned to the rhythm of freelance projects, grocery lists, and bedtime routines. Yet everything felt slightly different now. Not in a disruptive way, more like the air had shifted quietly, but undeniably. Daniel had kept his word. Every day since the hospital, he had shown up. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes small puzzles, sometimes just himself and a willingness to listen to Lily recount her day at school in painstaking detail. He never pushed, never overstepped. To Lily, he was simply Dr. Daniel, a kind face who somehow always knew the best animal facts and how to draw giraffes that looked like actual giraffes. Emily watched their connection grow in real time, and it filled her with a mix of emotions she hadn't prepared for.
Pride, warmth, hope, and fear.
Because the more present Daniel became in their lives, the more the reality of what he might want began to weigh on her. It came to a head on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lily was at Rachel's house for a sleepover, and Emily had invited Daniel over for coffee, something she hadn't done before. Until now, their conversations had been brief and always around Lily. This time, it was just the two of them, the quiet of her apartment stretching between them like a fragile thread. Daniel sat at her kitchen table, watching her stir cream into his coffee. You didn't have to make this feel like an interview, he said, smiling gently. I didn't, she said, setting his mug down. But there's something I want to talk about. Something we both know is coming. He nodded slowly. All right. Emily sat across from him, hands wrapped around her own mug. Lily doesn't know the truth yet. That you're her father. I know, he said. She's 6.
She's smart.
And she already loves you. But this isn't just about a title. It's about what comes with it. Expectations. Boundaries. Stability. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table.
Émilie, understand.
I've been thinking about this too. And I want to talk to her.
When you're ready.
On your terms. I appreciate that, she said. But I need to ask you something first. And I want an honest answer. Anything. She looked him directly in the eye. What does this mean for your life? Because I know who your parents are. I remember you mentioned them, vaguely, back in Portland. I looked them up.
Daniel blinked.
You did. I needed to know what I was up against, she said.
Margaret N. Thomas Hart.
Your family basically funds half of the pediatric research in this state. Your dad's on the board of the hospital.
Daniel Siged.
Yes, that's true. So where do I fit into that world? She asked, voice low. Where does Lily? He paused for a long time, then sat back in his chair. You don't fit into that world. Not the way they want people to. Then what happens when they find out about her? I don't know, he said. But I know what I'm going to do when they do. Emily raised an eyebrow. Which is?
Tel dem ze trousse. Det jag var dokter.
That I'm involved in her life. That I want to be a father. Emily scoffed lightly.
Just like that.
No, he admitted.
Not just like that.
They're going to lose their minds. My mother will probably suggest I fight for custody, just to control the narrative. My father will think I've ruined the Hart name. But I'm not them. I'm not letting their expectations dictate my life anymore. Emily's voice turned quiet. You're willing to walk away from all of that?
From the hospital board seat? The family name? Your inheritance.
Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. I already have. I just haven't told them yet. The room fell silent. Finally, Emily said, she doesn't need a name. Or money. Or legacy. She just needs you. But if you're in, you need to be all in. I am, he said. 100%. The next evening, Daniel made the drive out to his parents' estate. It was a sprawling property north of the city, with manicured lawns, a private driveway, and a front door heavy enough to belong to a museum. Margaret Hart answered, perfectly composed in a cream blouse and tailored slacks. Daniel, she said, surprised. You didn't say you were coming. I didn't want to give you a reason to tell me you were busy. She stepped aside and let him in, the air inside the house colder than the temperature outside. Thomas Hart was in the sitting room, reading a newspaper like it was still 1975. He looked up and removed his reading glasses. Well, he said, this is unexpected. Daniel stood in the center of the room and said the words without flinching.
Jag var dokter.
Her name is Lily. She's 6 years old. I didn't know about her until recently, but I'm in her life now. And I intend to stay there. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's voice cut through it. Is this a joke? No, Daniel said.
Où est-ce the mother?
Thomas asked, already bracing for disappointment. Her name is Emily Walker. We met at a conference years ago.
We lost touch.
She raised Lily on her own. And she's done an incredible job. Margaret stood rigid, her hands clenched. You realize what this does to your future? To our family name? I realize it changes everything, Daniel said. But it also gives me a future I actually want.
Thomas shook his head.
You're throwing away your career for some. Don't, Daniel said sharply. Don't insult her. Or my daughter. Margaret's eyes were glassy with restrained fury. And what? You expect us to play grandparents now? Parade around some child we didn't even know existed? I don't expect anything, Daniel said. But if you want a relationship with me moving forward, you'll respect her. Both of them. He didn't stay long after that.
The message was clear.
A line had been drawn. For the first time in his life, he had chosen to cross it. And he didn't regret it. When he got back to his car, he pulled out his phone and sent Emily a message. They know. It didn't go well. But I'm still here. Back in her apartment, Emily stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed 2 words in response. So are we. Winter settled over Seattle like a soft gray blanket. The rain came down in constant, quiet sheets, the sun hidden more often than not. Emily didn't mind. She liked the way the city slowed in winter, how the coffee shops stayed full and people spoke in hushed tones as if not to disturb the air. Lily had taken to wearing a purple raincoat everywhere, even inside. She was healthy again, energetic, back to her imaginative stories and endless questions. Daniel had become a fixture in their lives. He visited 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. He walked Lily to school when Emily had early meetings. He stayed for dinner once a week, helping Lily with spelling and listening to her chatter about everything from sea otters to solar systems. And Emily, she was adjusting. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of fear when she saw how much Lily adored him. A small voice in her whispered, "What if he leaves? What if he changes his mind? What if you've opened the door too wide, too soon?" But every time he showed up, on time, patient, present, those fears retreated just a little more. They still hadn't told Lily the truth. Emily had thought she'd know when the moment was right. But each day came and went, and the words sat heavy in her throat. She didn't want it to be a revelation born out of obligation. She wanted it to be a gift. Then, in late February, Lily got sick again. It started with a cough. A dry, hacking sound that wouldn't go away. Then came the fever, the fatigue. Emily took her to urgent care, where the doctor assured her it was just a seasonal virus. Rest, fluids, time. But by the second night, Lily couldn't keep food down. Her breathing turned shallow again. Emily didn't wait this time. She bundled her up and drove straight to Seattle General. Daniel was on duty. When he saw them walk through the ER doors, his expression changed instantly. Not panic, just focused urgency. "She's not bouncing back like she should," Emily said, her voice tight with worry.
Something is not right.
Daniel ushered them into a room, ordered labs, monitored her vitals personally. Within the hour, it became clear, this wasn't a typical virus. Lily's immune system wasn't responding the way it should. There were markers in her blood work that didn't make sense. That night, as Lily slept under observation, Daniel pulled Emily aside into the hallway. "I want to rerun the genetic panels," he said. "There's something going on beneath the surface. Something systemic. We may have missed it last time because the signs were mild." Emily nodded. "Do whatever you need to do." "And Emily," he hesitated, "if this is genetic, I might not just be the one treating her. I might be the key to understanding it." She understood what he was saying. Her side of the family had no known history of immune disorders. If this was inherited, it was likely from him. Over the next 24 hours, Daniel submitted his own blood work for comparative analysis. He stayed with Lily, barely sleeping, only leaving her bedside when absolutely necessary. Emily watched him as he sat beside her daughter, reading quietly or gently adjusting the blanket over her. He looked more like a father than any title or test result could confirm. The results came back 3 days later. Daniel was a carrier of a rare recessive genetic condition that affected immune system regulation. It wasn't fatal, not directly, but it could complicate responses to common viruses. If inherited, it made recovery harder and left patients more vulnerable to secondary infections. Lily had inherited one copy of the gene from him. It was manageable, with the right treatment and care plan, but it was serious. Daniel stood in the hospital conference room holding the report in his hand, his voice calm but strained. "If I hadn't been here," he said quietly, "we wouldn't have caught this in time. We might have treated the symptoms and missed the cause. This changes everything about how we care for her going forward." Emily didn't respond at first. She was staring at the report, trying to make sense of the clinical terms, the probabilities, the weight of what they now knew. "She's going to be okay," Daniel said. "But she needs long-term monitoring. And she needs both of us in the loop." Emily nodded slowly. "Then she needs to know." Daniel looked at her. "You're sure?" "Yes."
Émilie exhaled.
"This isn't just about our past anymore. It's about her future. She deserves the truth." They decided to wait until Lily was discharged, until she was home and rested. 3 days later, they sat together in the living room of Emily's apartment. Lily was curled on the couch between them, wrapped in her favorite blanket, sipping warm apple juice. The rain tapped gently at the windows. "Sweetheart," Emily began, her voice gentle, "there's something important we want to tell you." Lily looked up, blinking. "You know how Dr. Daniel has been spending a lot of time with us?" Emily said. Lily nodded. "He's my favorite." Daniel smiled, but said nothing. "Well," Emily continued, "there's a reason for that."
A réali spécial raison.
She paused, then looked at Daniel. He picked up where she left off. Lily, he said softly, I'm not just your doctor.
I'm your dad.
The room went still. Lily stared at him, confused at first, then quiet. She looked at Emily. Is that true? Emily nodded, her eyes brimming.
Yes, honey. I meilleur dad à longtemps imago.
I didn't know how to tell you. But he's been here. He's been helping. And he wants to keep being part of your life. Lily was silent for a long moment. Then she turned back to Daniel.
You're my dad.
He nodded. I am. Forever. Daniel's throat tightened. Forever if you'll have me. She thought for a moment. Then she crawled across the couch and climbed into his lap, her little arms wrapping tightly around his neck. I think I already knew, she whispered. Daniel held her close, closing his eyes, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Emily watched them, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. This was it, the breaking point. The moment when everything could have fallen apart, but instead, something stronger took its place. A beginning. Not without challenges.
Not without unknowns.
But no longer a secret. And no longer alone. 3 weeks after that night on the couch, something had shifted, not just between Emily and Daniel, but in the way the world seemed to move around them. There was a new rhythm forming, uneven at times, but undeniably theirs. Daniel had started coming by in the mornings, not just to drop Lily off at school, but to sit down and have coffee with Emily. Sometimes they spoke about schedules, medical checkups, or school projects. Other times, they said nothing at all, just sat together in a quiet that no longer felt awkward. They weren't a couple. Not officially. Not in the traditional sense. But they were something. And Emily could feel the shape of it growing, hesitant but strong. Lily, for her part, took the news in a way only children can, simply and completely. She began introducing Daniel to her friends as her dad without any explanation, as if that had always been the case. She asked him to braid her hair, to read her stories, to tell her about what kind of kid he was when he was little. Daniel stepped into that role with quiet grace.
Not performative.
Not overcompensating.
Juste présent.
Still, not everything was easy. There was his job, his place at the hospital, where whispers had started after word of his new life spread. There were his parents, silent since his declaration, their disapproval heavy but unspoken. And then there was the matter of paperwork. It started with a call from the school, asking about emergency contacts. Then came the pediatric clinic, recommending a formal acknowledgement of guardianship in case Lily ever needed urgent medical consent again. Emily had known this was coming, but it still made her uneasy. The idea of putting it all on paper, signatures, legal responsibility, rights, it made everything real in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily brought it up. They were sitting on the balcony of her apartment, wrapped in jackets, mugs of tea warming their hands. The city hummed below them, quiet and steady. I got the forms, she said. Daniel looked at her.
For guardianship.
She nodded. The doctor said it would be a good idea.
Just in cas anything et vers à peine tout me.
He didn't speak for a moment. Then, do you want me to sign them? I think you should, she said. But only if you're ready. He turned toward her. Emily, I've been ready since the day I walked into that hospital room and saw her face. I believe you, she said. It's just, this changes everything. You'll have legal rights. Responsibilities. I want those. And you're sure this isn't just guilt? Or instinct?
Hors obligation.
He shook his head. It's love. That's all. Emily felt something break open inside her. Not in a painful way, but like the cracking of ice on a thawing lake. She nodded. Okay. We'll do it together. Later that week, they sat side by side in a lawyer's office, pens in hand, signing forms that made Daniel Lily's legal co-guardian. There were no tears. No fanfare. Just quiet agreement and a sense of completion that neither of them expected. Afterward, they took Lily out for ice cream to celebrate, though they didn't explain exactly what they were celebrating. She chose mint chocolate chip and insisted they all sit on the same side of the booth. Are we a family now? She asked between spoonfuls. Daniel and Emily looked at each other. Yes, Emily said. Always, Daniel added. That night, Daniel stayed for dinner. Then dishes. Then story time. Then, for the first time, he didn't leave. He slept on the couch, at Emily's request, nothing romantic, nothing assumed.
Juste présence.
Stability. The unspoken promise that he wasn't going anywhere. In the morning, Lily crept out of bed and tiptoed into the living room. She saw him sleeping there, curled under a blanket, and smiled like the world made perfect sense. Later that week, Daniel stood before the hospital board and informed them of his situation. "I have a daughter," he said, simply. "Her name is Lily. She's 6. I wasn't part of her life until recently, but that's changed. I'm telling you this because I believe in transparency, and because she's part of who I am now." The room went silent. His father, Thomas Hart, sat at the head of the table, unreadable. "You understand what this could mean for your future here," one board member said.
For your standing.
"Your visibility." Daniel nodded. "I do. But I also know that being a father doesn't make me less of a doctor. And if anyone here thinks it does, maybe I'm not in the right place." It was bold.
Mais breathless.
But Daniel didn't flinch. He walked out of the meeting without waiting for applause or condemnation. That night, he told Emily everything. "They didn't say much," he said. "But I think I made my point." "And your parents?" she asked. "They're not ready. I don't know if they ever will be. But I'm not waiting for their permission." She nodded, and for the first time, didn't feel the need to protect herself with distance or suspicion. That weekend, Lily drew a picture of the three of them, Emily, Daniel, and herself, standing under a rainbow, holding hands. She taped it to the fridge and wrote "My family" in all caps. Neither Emily nor Daniel moved it. It stayed there, crooked and crayon-streaked, a declaration of its own. Later, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, the little girl yawned and said, "I think you and Daddy should get married."
Émilie looked.
"That's a big idea." "Well," Lily said seriously, "you already love each other." Emily's heart stuttered, but she only kissed Lily's forehead and whispered, "Good night, brave girl." In the living room, Daniel waited with a cup of tea, one hand resting on the arm of the couch where he'd first fallen asleep in their home. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate before sitting beside him. They didn't speak about the future that night. They just sat together in the soft light, the hum of the city beyond the windows, the weight of uncertainty replaced by something steadier. Not certainty, but choice. And that, at last, was enough. Spring came late to Seattle that year, like a shy guest arriving after the party had already begun. The cherry blossoms bloomed cautiously, the skies gave way to streaks of light only after days of steady gray. But when it came, it transformed the city. Parks filled with laughter again. Sidewalks shimmered under drying rain. And in a small apartment above a quiet corner cafe, life was changing too. Emily stood at the window of her kitchen, barefoot, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. She watched Lily play in the courtyard below with 2 neighborhood kids, their giggles rising like music through the air. Every now and then, Lily would look up toward the apartment, waving with wild enthusiasm when she saw Emily in the window.
She waved back, smiling.
Behind her, Daniel set 2 plates on the table. He'd started cooking more lately, learning as he went. His omelet still came out a little too brown, and he didn't quite understand the science of baking, but he tried, and that meant everything. Emily turned to him. "Do you remember when silence was awkward between us?" He looked up, amused. "I remember a lot of awkward, including my first attempt at roasted vegetables." She laughed and took her seat. "That wasn't cooking. That was vegetable cremation." He feigned offense. Harsh but fair. They ate in the soft hush of a Saturday morning, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for conversation. Outside, Lily called out something about ladybugs, and Daniel instinctively rose to check from the window, his eyes lighting up when he spotted her. "I still can't believe it," he said after a moment.
Believe what?
"That she's real.
Det jag var doktor.
That this is my life now." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You earned it. You chose it. Over and over." He turned to her.
So did you.
They finished breakfast slowly, then joined Lily outside. She insisted they build a nature museum on the patio, a collection of sticks, leaves, and particularly round rocks. Daniel let her lecture him on the difference between a mossy stone and a regular one while Emily watched them, heart full and aching in the best way. Later that week, Daniel asked Emily to go for a walk. Not with Lily this time. Just the two of them. They strolled through Green Lake Park, hands brushing but not quite touching. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon light, ducks cutting quiet lines across the surface. Families walked by with strollers, couples shared benches, joggers passed with steady rhythms. Daniel stopped near a cluster of trees, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small worn photograph. It was the picture Lily had drawn months ago. The one she had taped to the fridge. My family. He looked at it, then at Emily. I've been carrying this around. Every day. Emily softened. She has a way of cutting straight to the truth. He nodded. She does. And I think it's time I say something I should have said a long time ago. He stepped closer. Emily, I don't know what version of the future you imagined when you first found out you were pregnant. But I want to be part of the version you believe in now.
The real one. Not perfect, not simple.
But honest. Built on this. She searched his face, breath catching. I love you, he said.
He loved you the night we met.
And it never went away. I didn't even realize it then. But I do now.
He loves the way you veures der Docteur.
I love the life you built from scratch. And I want to build something with you, if you'll let me. Emily was quiet for a long moment, emotions swirling in her chest. I spent years protecting Lily from a story I didn't know how to write, she said. But you showed up. You didn't just step into the story, we're writing a new one together. She took his hand. I love you too. They stood there, holding each other, surrounded by the sound of water and wind and the quiet magic of everything that could be. They didn't rush into anything. They talked about the future like architects, carefully sketching blueprints, where they might live, what kind of school Lily might attend, whether or not they would blend their finances, their last names.
No proposal, no ring.
Just choices, made side by side. A few months later, Daniel officially moved in. Not because it was convenient, but because it made sense. Because it felt like home. Lily adjusted with ease. She liked that breakfast was always a two-person job now. She liked that Daniel helped her with her homework and tucked her in when Emily had late meetings. She liked the way the apartment felt warmer, fuller. One night, as she brushed her teeth, she looked at herself in the mirror and said, I think this is what a real family looks like. Emily overheard and smiled. Because it was. Later that year, they visited Daniel's parents, not to win approval, but to introduce Lily. It wasn't smooth. There was tension, defensiveness, hesitation. But there was also curiosity. And by the end of the visit, Margaret Hart had sat beside Lily on the porch and asked her about her favorite book. Progress, however small. Time passed. Lily grew.
Daniel and Emily found a rhythm, imperfect, but full of grace.
They fought sometimes. About money. About routines. About whose turn it was to do laundry. But they always circled back to the truth, this was worth fighting for. On Lily's 7th birthday, they held a small party in the backyard of their new house. There were balloons, cupcakes, a handmade banner that read Lucky 7, and laughter that echoed into the trees. At the end of the party, Lily stood on the deck, sticky with frosting, and said, This is the best day ever. Emily wrapped her arm around Daniel's waist. She says that every year. She means it every time. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. What do you think she'll remember? Daniel asked. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder.
Not the complication. Just the love.
Daniel nodded. Then we've done our job. They stayed like that, in the quiet, in the dark, in the peace of a life that had once been fractured and uncertain, now whole. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't the ones that follow the plan. They're the ones rewritten by love.
Over and over again.